Hi friends, I hope you guys are having a great day. Welcome or welcome back to Trapped by Love. I apologise for the glare in my glasses. As you can probably hear, I'm not doing real well. That is also the reason for my lack of uploads lately. So bear with me, my contacts are not good for me and my migraines at the moment. Appreciate you guys being here. If you are interested in true crime and justice, you are in the right place. So I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button because we'd love to have you join us. By way of disclaimer, we discuss true crime cases involving domestic abuse and domestic homicide on this channel. So if that is not the kind of content that you were looking for, I completely understand. Thanks for stopping by. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into today's case. Today's case is that of Jennifer and Abby Blagg. Jennifer grew up in Oklahoma with her single mother and brother David. They were a very close family. David and Jennifer made a point of engaging in each other's interests. Whether it was dolls or cars, they were always happy to play together. Jennifer was quite artistic growing up. She played piano and took dance. She was fun-loving and sociable with many, many friends. When Jennifer was 12, though, her lighthearted and free-spirited way was crushed by an older male family friend. This person sexually assaulted Jennifer, and after this incident, she was understandably wary and not so carefree. She lost some of her natural confidence. However, as she grew, she began to regain her sense of self. And when she graduated high school, she decided to head off to college in California. It was in California in the early 90s that Jennifer met Michael Blagg. He was in the Navy. Michael's life growing up had revolved around the military because his father was an Air Force colonel. So their family moved around a lot. This may have hampered Michael's social life a bit, but it didn't affect his grades. He was said to be a very well-behaved child who did very well in school. In fact, he did so well in school that he got into the governor's honours program and went on to study nuclear engineering at Georgia Tech. Through this time, he worked part-time as well, and this is also when he enlisted in the Navy. So while in the Navy, he flew helicopters in the First Gulf War. Jennifer and Michael met through mutual friends. They were each invited to a party by a friend. These friends happened to be dating each other. And as soon as Jennifer and Michael met, they instantly felt chemistry. Michael gave Jennifer his phone number and asked her out on a date. Their first date was to the movies, and from then on, they were rarely apart. The couple married in 1991, and they seemed, from the outside looking in, to be an ideal couple. They had a daughter in 1995 who they named Abby. Jennifer was a stay-at-home mum, and she was thrilled about this. She was a very attentive mother, and once Abby was in school, Jennifer was working at her daughter's Christian school as a teacher's assistant, and she never missed a performance or event. Jennifer was also very involved with her church, setting up and conducting prayer groups. One of the huge factors in her attraction to Michael was that he was just as invested in his faith as she was in hers. Michael wound up teaching Sunday school and also became a deacon in the family's church. The family moved around a lot, and in 2001 they had just moved to Colorado from South Carolina and settled in an area just west of Grand Junction. Now, Jennifer had been happy in Simpsonville, South Carolina. She had friends and ran a women's Bible study. Jennifer's friend Edie Melson said, quote, "I think Jennifer loved the fact that Michael was strong and that he was a take charge kind of guy. He looked after her. He was protective of her," end quote. However, she also says there were moments where Michael's protectiveness struck Jennifer's friends as odd. Edie recalls a time when she and another friend were at the Blagg home when Jennifer noticed that it was past 4 and that Michael would be home from work soon. Edie says, quote, "You could see the absolute panic in her face. All she could think about was getting us out of the house and getting things set so Michael could have a good environment," end quote. He obviously wanted things just so, and Jennifer knew it. They came to the Grand Junction area for Michael's work. He had a job as an operations manager at a manufacturing plant called Amatec. By all accounts, the Blaggs were a close and happy family. Both Jennifer and Michael were very involved parents. Michael taught Abby how to ski and to ride a bike. He was always there to cheer her on. They were active and seemed to those around them to enjoy the outdoors and spent a lot of their time, just the three of them, doing things together. Abby was an outgoing and energetic child who loved to talk with anyone and about anything. She was well behaved and religious herself, having been raised in the church. Michael was a hard-working family man, but when his workday was done, he would head home to spend time with Jennifer and Abby, playing with his daughter and enjoying the ritual of a bedtime book each night. On the 12th of November 2001, Jennifer helped her daughter set out her clothes ready for school the following day and put her school bag with her completed homework in it in the hall, ready for the morning. After prayers and her bedtime story, Abby went off to sleep. Michael says that he and Jennifer sat up for a little while, and then at around 10 p.m, both Michael and Jennifer went to bed together. The 13th of November began as any normal day, according to Michael. He left between 5:30 and 6 for work, which was his regular schedule. And before leaving, he says he kissed both Jennifer and Abby goodbye as they slept. Michael went off to work, and as he says was usual for him to do, he called a few times throughout the day, but wasn't able to get hold of Jennifer, not on her mobile or the landline. His last call was around 3 o'clock. He left a message saying that he was concerned because he couldn't get a hold of her. Then, not long later, he headed home for the day. When he arrived home at 4 p.m, Jennifer and Abby were not home, and the scene he came into prompted him to call 911. Michael had found his family missing and a large pool of blood in the master bedroom. He also noted that Jennifer's purse had been emptied out. The police arrived and found Michael standing outside waiting for them. Police then went in and checked the house to make sure that no one was hurt inside, and they secured the scene. Responding officers then called in the Complex Crimes Unit to investigate what they considered a suspicious crime scene. The investigators noted that even though there was a jewelry box overturned, nothing was missing, and this was confirmed by Michael himself. The police canvassed the area, talking to neighbours, but no one had seen or heard anything. They also contacted the nearby hospitals to see if anyone had been brought in with any major injuries. The investigators initially thought that it was a robbery, kidnapping, but couldn't work out who would be targeting a devout, well-respected Christian family. The police called Abby's school to see if they could shed any light on the situation, and it was at this point that they found out that Abby had never made it to school that day. But even stranger was that someone that the school was unable to identify had contacted them the day before, saying that Abby wouldn't be in the following day. The police now believe that someone had been planning this, and they were trying to work out what had happened, wondering if the family had been stalked and that this had been a targeted attack on Jennifer and or Abby. So they were trying to determine a timeline, and now that they knew that Abby hadn't gone to school, they realised that whatever had happened must have happened pretty early on in the day, basically just after Michael had gone to work. They also started questioning Michael. He gave them a rundown of the events of the day, but the police were still confused. It was such a small window of opportunity, and yet to target this regular church-going family was just not sitting right with the investigators. With the amount of blood at the scene, it was obvious to police that whoever had been hurt was at the very least severely injured, but they were more than likely deceased. However, in the beginning, not knowing whose blood it was or being able to determine with any certainty that either or both Jennifer and Abby had been killed, they were both listed as missing. The investigators spoke with Michael to see if he knew of any issues Jennifer was having with anyone. They also checked her journals, but both Michael and her own writings gave no indication that there'd been anything or anyone bothering Jennifer. At this time, in the early days of the investigation, Michael took to the media, pleading for the safe return of his wife and daughter. Search efforts had been set up to start combing the banks and the area surrounding the Colorado River, which was only a quarter mile from their home. All the while, investigators continued to process the scene inside the Blagg's home. They brought in dogs to track Jennifer and Abby's scent and spoke with anyone and everyone from fellow church members to the landscapers in the neighbourhood. But none of these lines of investigation got them any closer to understanding what had happened. They did find that the Blaggs were a very closed and insular family. Jennifer, despite primarily being at home as a mother and housewife, didn't have any friends in the neighbourhood. She really didn't have anyone close by that she would be able to confide in. Now, this to me is a red flag. The constant moving around and keeping to themselves. In some instances, this may not be a cause for concern. However, this type of nomadic and isolated lifestyle gives the cover needed for abuse. You see it a lot with child abuse. It gives the same screen to hide domestic abuse. Jennifer had nowhere to turn to vent or to get some perspective or help if she needed it. Authorities received anonymous calls from a woman stating that she'd seen the family's minivan around the Park Ridge area of Colorado on the day of Jennifer and Abby's disappearance. And once Jennifer and Abby's pictures had been flooding the media, authorities got a call from an employee from Colorado Legal Services in Grand Junction. They called to tell police that they recognized Jennifer. They went on to explain that Jennifer had come into the office just days before going missing, and she was in a very emotional state. She claimed that her husband, Michael Blagg, was abusing her and that she was extremely fearful of him. She wanted to arrange for a divorce as soon as was humanly possible, and when she was told that there wasn't anyone available to see her right then and there, she ran from the office hysterically upset. So with this new information, authorities set Michael squarely in their sights. By the end of November, police had Michael under surveillance. They hadn't officially named him a suspect or even a person of interest, but they had their suspicions and were questioning him regarding his version of events. Michael had denied any involvement in the family's disappearance anytime the police questioned him, and even told the media that he was upset that he was still being questioned and looked into. He posted a reward of $3,000 that the family's church had helped him raise for any information leading to the whereabouts of Jennifer and Abby. Then, in December, a month after the disappearance, Michael moved out of the home. He said it was too difficult living there, surrounded by memories of his family. He very publicly began looking for a new home that would accommodate the three of them. And being close to Christmas, he made a big show of the presents that he had waiting for Jennifer and Abby under the tree. So many people were feeling bad for this poor man, whose heartache was so evident over the tragedy that had befallen his family. However, some people were starting to smell a rat when it came to his reactions to things surrounding the disappearance. People who had been fierce defenders of Michael initially were beginning to think twice before speaking up for him now. Forensic testing of the family's minivan came back showing that trace amounts of Jennifer's blood were found throughout the vehicle. There was also blood found in the garage that came back as Jennifer's as well. So whatever had happened to Jennifer and presumably Abby had involved the minivan, most likely for transporting them to wherever they ended up. However, when police were called to the home on the day of the disappearance, this vehicle was sitting in the garage of the home like any other day. Why would an intruder use the family vehicle to remove the victims and then go to the trouble of returning it? The police were probably coming to the same conclusion that you and I are right now. That is beyond suspicious and super shady. The next thing that authorities and anyone else listening to Michael's media appearances found confusing was that now, in January, 2 months after the disappearance, he was claiming that a whole lot of Jennifer's jewellery was missing, even though he'd been asked by police at the time to check thoroughly and to see if anything had been taken, and he told them that no, nothing was missing. So while police had Michael under surveillance, they witnessed him stealing office items from his work. Now, we're not talking staplers and pens here. He stole a paper shredder and a table, which is just odd. The plant manager also contacted the police to advise them that he had received complaints from a few women that Michael had been following them. When the police brought him in and questioned him about the theft of items worth around $500, he vehemently denied it. They also asked him about the jewelry that was all of a sudden missing. All in all, Michael was in the station for around 10 hours. A few hours in, the police straight out accused him of killing Jennifer and Abby. At this point, he began crying and asking about different categories of murder and the sentences that they entailed. Police thought they were about to get a confession, but that was not to be. The police had failed to take into account Michael's military training while they were interrogating him. He was well prepared to withstand their questioning, and though he continued to speak with police for a time, he eventually asked for an attorney and left the police station. The following day, when investigators went to Michael's new apartment to follow up about the stolen items, they were shocked to find that Michael had attempted to take his own life. They found Michael in the bathtub naked, with a Bible beside him. They noticed immediately that his left wrist had been cut. There seemed to be a lot of blood in the water, but Michael did have a pulse and was breathing. Because the investigator on the scene was concerned that Michael was about to pass from these wounds, he attempted to get a dying declaration. But once again, Michael denied having anything to do with Jennifer and Abby's disappearance. Many weren't buying Michael's desperate act. Jennifer's brother believed it to be just another attempt to garner sympathy, and it wasn't long before law enforcement were informed that Michael's wounds were quite superficial and he was not in any danger of dying from them. The investigators are now sure that Michael was responsible for Jennifer and Abby's disappearance and probable murder. However, feeling that he was guilty was not enough. They needed more before they could charge him. 5 months after Michael made that 911 call in the April of 2002, the Sheriff's Department coordinated a county-wide search in an effort to find Jennifer and Abby's remains. There were 2,000 volunteers out scouring any area that Michael could have made it to within the time that he had on that day. This search was not only on the ground though, they were also searching overhead. They had planes flying over different areas. Hundreds of square miles were searched over these 10 days, but they came up empty-handed. In questioning Michael's work colleagues, authorities were told of some behaviour that the employees had noticed on the day of the disappearance that they thought was out of character for Michael. They told the investigators of how Michael had been seen dumping a whole lot of trash in the dumpster at their work site. This is not something they'd ever seen him do before, and it made police wonder if this had been the way he had decided to dispose of his wife and child. That thought is just heartbreaking. Authorities followed it up and began searching Mesa County's landfill. This was a massive undertaking. When law enforcement announced that they were going to be searching the landfill, Michael Blagg apparently left the state. He didn't let anyone know he was going to be leaving, not even police. Letting police know wasn't something he had to do legally. He wasn't under arrest or even formally a person of interest, but it certainly doesn't look good. So the search team started potholing, trying to find newspapers or anything to give them an indication of the date that the garbage in a specific location had been brought in. They looked for 2 weeks and found nothing. Then on the 5th of June 2002, which was the 16th day of searching, the excavator brought up a bucket of refuse, and this is where they found Jennifer's remains. She'd been wrapped in a tent. Her remains were badly decomposed and had to be identified by dental records. The garbage found around Jennifer's remains was identified to be from Amatek, which is, of course, was his place of work. They had fired him by this point because of the whole taking a table home with him business. Anyway, Michael doing a runner didn't really get him too far because he was still under surveillance. And once they had a positive ID on Jennifer's remains, he was arrested in Georgia, where he was hiding out with his mum. He was charged with first-degree murder and was brought back to Colorado for trial. The autopsy showed that Jennifer had been shot through the eye and the bullet was still lodged in her skull. The investigators believed that she'd been shot in her sleep as she was found with a retainer that she only used when she went to bed. And the remnants of the clothing that she had on were pajamas. The search team did continue on at the landfill for a further 7 weeks trying to find 6-year-old Abby's remains, but to no avail. So they took what they had and poured over all the evidence, and they also looked into the relationship and family dynamics. When they'd gone through the home initially, the police had found a religious theme book with Jennifer's handwritten notes in the margin. She'd written that she and Michael had fought and that she'd skipped church and spent the morning with Stanley instead. She wrote that she had had a wonderful prayer time with him, and this was dated the 12th of November 2001. That's the day before Michael had called 911. So investigators were trying to work this out. They wondered who Stanley was. Could Jennifer have been having an affair? Could that have been what led Michael to kill her? When police work out who the mystery man Stanley is, things start making more sense. Because Stanley was actually televangelist Dr. Charles Stanley. Jennifer was extremely devoted to him and put a lot of stock in his teachings. The investigators tracked down the episode, which aired on the day of the notation, and found that Reverend Stanley was preaching a sermon called The Keys to Peace. In this sermon, he strongly condemned pornography and those addicted to it. When police took a deep dive into Michael's computer, they were quite shocked when they found evidence of Michael using an escort service and a file of more than 1,000 pornographic images. And to hear the detectives tell it, the nature of these pictures were apparently in the realm of force. Investigators were beginning to see an emerging theme of dominance and control from Michael, and the images that he had stored on his computer seemed to indicate that those feelings were directed towards women. Michael had proclaimed that he and his family were born-again Christians, that they had a very traditional marriage, but these hidden photos that law enforcement had found on his computer showed a very different side of Michael Blagg. When police pressed Michael on what they'd found on his computer, he told them that it was research to spice up his marriage. He went on to admit that he had made Jennifer watch with him to educate themselves. This seemed to be at odds with what the investigators had learned about Jennifer's character and what she would be comfortable with. From all accounts and from her own journal entries, she was a deeply religious woman who took her relationship with God very seriously. So police began asking themselves, could Jennifer, confronting her husband about the images on his computer after hearing Reverend Stanley's message that Sunday, have set in motion the chain of events that led to her death? They thought that was the most likely scenario. However, when Michael went to trial, the defense alleged that a child predator killed Jennifer and kidnapped Abby, and that ever since the investigation has been tainted by the false assumption that it's always the husband. The prosecution said that during the early hours of November 13, 2001, Michael Blagg shot his wife in the head while she slept, wrapped her in a tent, loaded her body into the family minivan, and then threw her into the dumpster at his office. Michael Blagg was found guilty of killing his wife in 2004 and sentenced to life in prison. However, the conviction was overturned 11 years later when a juror was found to have lied on her questionnaire about being the victim of domestic violence. So Michael Blagg was tried once again in 2018, where he was once again found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. And we can thank the Lord for that. However, what about Abby? Where is Abby? It's now been 20 years since this little 6-year-old was tucked up into her bed and read a bedtime story before completely vanishing. Abby is still listed as a missing person, and even though law enforcement believe she most likely perished the day her mother did, I will put her missing poster in here with an age progression picture on it. So if you do see someone that you think could be Abby, please, of course, call it in. But what do you guys think? Is Abby alive? I hate to say it, but I don't think so. The fact that her school was notified that she wouldn't be in just seems that he had planned to kill both his wife and daughter. Super sad. Oh, and side note, remember the Christmas presents that Michael had made a big show of having under his tree for Abby and Jennifer? Well, it came to light when he was arrested that those brightly wrapped boxes actually contained expensive items that he had bought for himself. Yep, that's right, around $5,500 worth of tech products, in fact. So much for the worried, loving father and husband. You guys, I'm pleased Michael is where he belongs, but I feel for the rest of the family not having all the answers in this case. My heart goes out to them. Now, before I sign off, number one, if you've made it this far, you are amazing. Thank you so much for listening to Jennifer and Abby's case, despite the fact that I sound like a frog. And number two, I'm going to be adding an extra upload each week. I know, I struggle to stay on schedule as it is, but bear with me. However, the second upload won't be a true crime case. These uploads will be educational videos around domestic abuse and healthy relationships. I will be putting them in a separate playlist and giving major disclaimers at the beginning of each one. So please feel free to skip them if they're not of interest or if they're triggering to you. But as always, my aim here is to spread awareness. My hope is that the more people who recognize the red flags and warning signs of abusive relationships, the less prevalent these cases will be in the future. Knowledge is power, and we need to know what to be on the lookout for so we can protect ourselves and each other. So in saying all of that, if the content of this case has raised any concerns for you regarding your own relationship or that of a loved one, please reach out for help. There is a list of resources in the show notes and the description box below. I thank you again for joining me today. I was going to say this week, but let's face it, today. And until next time, please take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. Bye.